Hey, Pastor Tarun here. Welcome to Authentic Church. It's so good to have you with us. We really pray that this sermon blesses you and helps you to experience the authentic love of Jesus Christ in your life today. Hey, before we get into the message, can you do me a favor and hit the subscribe button so that we can keep you up to date with the latest sermons every week? All right, here's the message.
You know, if you've been around church for any length of time, you're probably familiar with the routine of Good Friday. Yeah, Good Friday is the day that we remember that Jesus died on the cross for the sins of the world, for the forgiveness of those who have turned their backs on God, which is everybody, by the way, in case you were wondering. Sometimes you've got to fill in the blanks, you know. You kind of know the routine. Good Friday, okay, it's like the setup. It's the setup, and then the punchline comes on Sunday. It's like Jesus died on Friday, but we already know the ending of the story, and so it's good because we know the ending, yeah? And if you haven't been around church, maybe you're not so familiar about why we have church on a Friday. I got my boys up today and they said, it's not Sunday. Why are we going to church today, Dad? I said, it's Good Friday. And they said, what's good about it? I'm trying to sleep. I think sometimes in the routine of the way we do things, we can lose the meaning of why we do things. You know, Mum Rohini said so beautifully over communion, you know, why does Jesus' death matter? It matters because he meets us where we're at and he rescues us and he brings us into new life, not by anything we can do. But I don't know about you. I think after 2,000 years, sometimes the idea of a man hanging on a cross is a little bit of a foreign concept. Does anybody sometimes struggle with the image of a person being hung on a cross and like, why is that matter? I mean, okay, if you're a Christian and you know the standard answers, right? Well, Jesus was the sacrificial lamb and his blood was shed so the forgiveness of sins, so that we wouldn't have to keep sacrificing to God for his forgiveness. You all know those answers, yeah. But I think sometimes we can miss the depths of how significant what Jesus did actually was. And so today what I want to do is I want to tell you a story. It might be a story that you've perhaps never heard in relation to Easter, but I think as we ponder this story, it really plumbs the depths of how significant what Jesus did really was. So to tell this story, we've got to go back in time, way back in time, way back beyond Jesus. Jesus was 2,000 years ago. We're going to go even further back than that. We're going to go 2,800 years ago. 2,800 years ago, there was a king named Adad Nizari III. He was the king of Assyria. He was a powerful king. At this time, the Assyrian Empire was the most powerful empire in the world. They had been ruling their region, the Middle East, what was called the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia. They had been ruling this region of the world for 1,700 years. Adad Nizari III was from a long line of very strong, very powerful, very feared Assyrian kings. Like his father before him and his grandfather and many of his predecessors, he was violent. He was brutal. He ruled with force. He had an empire that stretched all the way from Babylon, which is modern-day Iraq, all the way down through Israel, all the way down to Egypt in North Africa. And the way the Assyrians hung on to their power and the way that they kept all of the other nations in check was they constantly waged war. Adad Nizari III was known for waging war for 32 years straight. He would be finished with one country and he would just move on to the next country. There was no stopping him. His tactics of subduing countries were so well known throughout the land that people feared just the name of the Assyrians. When they would come into a country, they wouldn't just subjugate the people and then set up their government in the country. No, they would absolutely decimate the country so that nobody could live there anymore. They would come in and they would deport tens of thousands of the citizens of the country they had taken over. They would take them as slaves back to their home cities in Assyria. 20,000, 30,000 archaeologists have found records of the numbers of slaves that were taken from the countries that were conquered. And of the people that were left, the people that were too weak and too feeble to actually become slaves, they would plow their fields with salt so no crops could grow. And nobody could come in and take over the land because the land was desolate. And then just to make sure that nobody rebelled and just to make sure that nobody would get an idea of standing up against them, they would get a few thousand of the people that they were deporting, and they would do things like decapitate them and hang their heads from the walls of every city they walked through. They would cut off arms and legs and leave them strewn outside the city walls. They would take their victims and they would skin them alive and hang their skins on the walls of the city. These were a brutal people. You think Hitler was bad? Trust me, the Assyrians were worse. And Adad-Nizari III was no different from all his predecessors. There was a hunger and a thirst in him to dominate everyone and everything. And as he finished one campaign, he would move on to the next campaign. And he built himself a fortress. He built himself a city. It was a huge city. It was said to have been so big that it would take you 3 days to walk from side to side. And this city was called Nineveh. Maybe you've heard of it. And one day Adad is sitting in his palace and he's contemplating the next war that he's going to wage. He's trying to figure out who he should conquer. Those Israelites down in the south, they're getting a bit uppity. They might need somebody to deal with them soon. And so as Adad is contemplating his next war, he's already subjugated the Babylonians and he's already got the Egyptians under his control. There's a commotion outside his palace. There are people crying and wailing, and he looks out, he stands out on his balcony, he looks out and he sees people tearing their clothes. And he calls to one of his aides and he says, "What the heck is going on? Somebody tell me what's going on." And his aide runs down into the city and he finds this prophet who smells like rotten fish. And he's standing in the middle of the city and he says, "In 40 days, Nineveh will be overturned." And so the aide runs back to his king and he says, "There's a prophet down there." And he said, "In 40 days, we're going to be overturned." And the people are in chaos because they're so terrified that this prophecy may come true, that they're pleading with this God to forgive them. And he said, "What God?" And his assistant said to him, "Well, this guy is from Israel. His name's Jonah. And he's crying out that in 40 days we'll be destroyed." All I can think of is that the God he must be talking about is the Israelite God, the one they call Yahweh. And Adad says, "I've heard of this Yahweh. He's a powerful God. I heard a story once where this Yahweh rescued the Israelites from the Egyptians. They were slaves in Egypt and he rescued them from Egypt and he destroyed the whole Egyptian army by drowning them in a sea. He took this band of slaves and he tracked them across the desert and they came to Canaan and they overthrew the Canaanites who had been living there for 300 years. This God, Yahweh, is powerful. I've heard of him, but he's not one of our gods." And the aide said, "I don't know what to tell you, king, but all I know is this guy's down there saying that in 40 days we're done." And the king thinks about it. And he contemplates all his power, all his might, all the fear that is instilled in millions of people over the years through his violence, through his war. And he thinks about this God. And one thing Adad knows is that, as most people in this time knew, that you don't upset the gods. The most important thing is you don't want the gods upset with you, because when the gods are upset with you, bad things happen. And so as Adad thinks, he thinks, okay, well, I don't know this Yahweh personally, but I know that he's powerful, and I know he's done some pretty powerful things against the enemies of Israel. Maybe I need to pay attention. And so Adad comes out to his aid and he says this, right, we're going to do something about this. We're the Assyrian Empire. We've ruled for 1,700 years. We can't be destroyed. We need to make peace with this God. We need to figure this out so he doesn't destroy us. So I want you to go out into the town, go out into the city, and tell everybody you find to tear their clothes and put ash on their head and beg this God for forgiveness. And the aide goes, okay, I'm writing this down, ash on the head, tear the clothes. And then as he's about to leave, he says, no, wait, I'm not finished. I think we need to stop eating for a while, because this God is so powerful. We need to do something very significant to convince him that we're not his enemy. And so he says, tell everybody not to eat for 40 days. We're going to fast so that maybe this God will see us and he will forgive us because we're being so good. And so the aide writes it down and he goes to walk out of the party. And he says, no, just wait. We need to do better than that. We need to make sure none of our animals are eating either. So make sure none of the cows and none of the goats and the dogs and the cats eat anything for 40 days. The whole city of Nineveh must fast and pour ash on our head and plead with this God, Yahweh, for forgiveness. And the aide goes out and he gets his heralds and he gets his criers, and they go out into the city saying, no eating, tear your clothes, put ash on your head, beg this God Yahweh for forgiveness lest he destroy us in 40 days. And the whole city of Nineveh does this, and they rip their clothes and they pour ash on their head and they skip lunch. And as his tummy is rumbling, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and Adad is wondering if he's going to be able to make 40 days. He did the 40-hour famine fast once, but that was tough. 40 days could be tougher. And as he's contemplating whether this is going to work, his aide runs in and he says, King, I've got news from the prophet. And he says, so soon? We have only just skipped lunch. And he said, the prophet is saying that he's heard from God and God has decided to forgive us. God has decided not to destroy us. And Adad Nazari III lifts up a shout of praise to the God Yahweh and says, let everybody worship this God. Let everybody in my empire worship this God, because he has shown mercy to us when he could have destroyed us. Us who are so wicked, so violent. But rather than giving us what we deserved, he gave us mercy. And 800 years later, this God Yahweh decided that people hadn't quite caught the message yet. And he decided to come down to earth and live amongst us. The first chapter of John says he was the one who was in the beginning, the one who created the heavens and the earth, the one who forgave the people of Nineveh, came and he walked among us and he shone the light of God and he invited us to follow him. His name was Jesus. And in Luke 11:30, Jesus stands up as the crowds are gathering and they're coming looking for somebody to save them. They're coming looking for answers. They're coming looking for some kind of purpose and meaning in their life. And Jesus stands up and he says, "You're all wicked. You're evil." And the crowd says, "Didn't expect that. I came for a feel-good message. I like my pastor's preaching to make me feel uplifted. This pastor, he's not so uplifting." But then Jesus qualifies himself. He said, just like Jonah was a sign to Nineveh, so I will be a sign to this generation. Just as Jonah was a sign to the people of Nineveh, so Jesus is a sign to us. No matter how desperate, no matter how wicked, no matter how broken, no matter how far away from God we are, the God Yahweh, who showed himself in the person of Jesus Christ, says, I'm not waiting 40 days for you to get your life right. All you have to do is turn to me and I'll forgive you. I don't need you to make restitution for all your evil deeds. I just need you to say, God, I need you. I don't need you to have it all figured out. I don't need you to sort your life out. I just need you to say, God, I can't do it without you. And if we, like the king of Nineveh, Adad, Nazari III, can say, God, have mercy on us. God is so merciful that he doesn't even care what your past looks like. He doesn't care how broken you think you are. He doesn't care that you haven't got all the answers. He says, I'm here. I want you. I love you. I forgive you. As we remember Jesus on the cross, what we're actually remembering is there is a God who created us, who is so desperate to be in relationship with us that he will move heaven and earth. He will sacrifice himself to convince us of his love. That all we need, like the thief on the cross, is just to say, Jesus, remember me. Just like Adad, God, have mercy on me. You know, I've met so many people that say, I used to go to church once, but I stopped going because I've got some stuff going on in my life. Stuff in my life is usually code for I've either messed up in some way, or I've got some brokenness, or I'm going through some challenges that I don't have answers for. And so many people disconnect from the family of God because they've got stuff going on in their life and they think that God couldn't possibly love a person like me. Unless you're like Adad Nazari III, I'm going to hazard a guess that God's got room in his heart for you. Unless you've flayed live people and hung their skins outside your house, I'm guessing that you haven't really screwed up that bad. And yet God could forgive him. You know, many years ago, I watched the movie Schindler's List. If you've ever seen it, it's the movie of the Nazi Holocaust and how one man, Schindler, used his factory to save many Jews from the gas chambers. But there's this one character in the movie. He's a Nazi soldier who looks over the camps where people are being executed. And for fun, for giggles, he sits on his balcony and he takes pot shots at the Jewish prisoners. And throughout the movie, you would see him stand up there with a gun and just take aim at this frail, starving prisoner and just shoot them in the back of the head and then laugh. He's quite a diabolical character, quite confronting if you've ever seen the movie. I remember walking out of that movie and I was so moved by the story, but so overwhelmed by how horrific human beings can be to each other. And I couldn't get this man out of my head. I said, God, this man so evil, how do people get like that? And as I'm walking out of the cinema, I remember where I was. It was Bankstown in Sydney. A long time ago. This is how much of an impact this made. I'm walking out of the cinema. I'd watched the movie by myself. I didn't have any friends at this time. And I'm saying, God, how can human beings be so awful, so cruel to each other? And I remember feeling the sense of God's voice speaking to me, and he said, do you know I died for him? And I stopped in my tracks. And I couldn't get my head around it. That man, that wicked, evil, cruel, psychopath who killed thousands of innocent people, you died for him? Yeah, I died for him. And if I can forgive him, I can forgive you. That's what we're talking about. Too often we exclude ourselves from the presence of God because we think we're not good enough. We think we haven't figured it out. Jesus doesn't need you to have all the answers. He just needs you to say, I need you. And on this Good Friday, I want you all to contemplate this thought. If Jesus can forgive Adad Nazari III, one of the most violent, evil men in history, he can forgive you. He can love you. He can meet you where you're at. You are not so far from his reach that he can't reach you. His love is not so limited that it can't find you. You know, the writer of Psalms says, where can I go to escape your presence? Even if I make my bed in hell, you'll find me there. When we remember the Jesus that died on the cross, we are remembering a God who loves you so much, he will find you even if you've made your bed in hell. Even if you've messed up 1,000,000 times. Even if you have no answers. And all he asks is we say, God, have mercy on me. I want to close by just praying with you today. If you're sitting here and you're contemplating what I've just said in the context of your own life, and maybe you're asking the question, can God love me? Can God heal me? Can God forgive me? I believe the answer to those questions is a resounding yes. And if you've ever needed evidence, then look at the story of Adad Nazari III. Look at the story of the thief on the cross. Look at the story of a bunch of dirty fishermen who were called out of obscurity to change the world, to a tax collector who was a thug and a standover man who became a follower of Jesus, to a woman who was caught in adultery and didn't even know whether she would survive to the next day because they wanted to stone her, for the prostitute who was covered in shame, to the leper who was cast out of society and could not be touched by anybody, to the blind man and the lame cripple who everybody shunned and treated like dirt. Jesus said, come. If you're burdened down with the weight of your sin, if you're burdened down with the weight of life, if you're burdened down with your own brokenness, come. I'll give you rest. If you can't see the way forward, I'll open your eyes and give you purpose. If you don't know how your heart will ever be whole again, I'll heal your wounds. If you don't know if you could ever be free from your addictions and the chains that hold you down, I'll open your prison and set you free. If you'll just come, follow me. Come, follow me. Come, follow me.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We really pray that message blessed you. If you enjoyed it, why don't you share it with a friend that you think will enjoy it also? And hit a like and give us a comment, because we'd love to hear back from you. If you'd like to give to the work of Authentic Church or get more involved, head over to our website, authenticchurch.com.au. We look forward to seeing you next time.